So everybody should be able to see that. So it's nice to see everybody. I'd like to think most of you got a good idea of who I am. So I'm James Banks. I'm the membership director. And my department, in tandem with Megan Brown, who's the membership officer, we now run the specialist registers at CIAT. So we're here to do the workshop about qualifying as a CIAT accredited conservationist. And the register identifies those chartered architectural technologists that are competent in the conservation of historical buildings and their surroundings. And again, Paul will give you some context around building surroundings and the importance of how they all dovetail with one another. So there's two options or recognitions you could get. The main one that we're going to talk about is for those who are practicing in the conservation area or specialism, and that comes with the accolade of CIAT-Accredited Conservationist. Moreover, if you're not necessarily practicing as a conservationist, but you feel you've got sufficient knowledge in that area or specialism, there is an ability for you to become a recognised conservationist, albeit with the moniker of non-practicing. So most of our accredited conservationists go for the full recognised accreditation because that's the area in which they're practicing. So to apply, what are the eligibility criteria? First and foremost, a current active chartered architectural technologist of CIAT. You can't apply for this unless you're a chartered member. But as soon as you're a chartered member, if you're not, you can apply the next day, should we say. So it's as and when you've got to that level of being a chartered architectural technologist. And as per all members and affiliates, you have to adhere and abide by the code of conduct. So who would potentially look to apply or seek to become an accredited conservationist? So we would define that as an individual who's got sufficient appropriate experience of conservation intervention work to be able to put together a portfolio to meet the competencies and the standards and the expectations as per the guidance and the competencies and the application process. If you are thinking about applying as a recognised conservationist but non-practicing, again, it goes back to knowledge and experience and submit portfolios or case studies of academic outputs, not project-based outputs per se, because that would be an accredited conservationist to potentially get that recognition and that accolade. Now, as per all professionals, whatever institute or disciplines or qualifications you hold, you know, with all professional bodies, there's an expectation of relevant CPD. You need to determine what's relevant to your scope of practice in this specialism. And obviously it will need to align and abide by the CIAT requirements. And every year you will be asked to provide evidence of your CPD in the specialism. You need to pay your annual subscription upon attainment. So that's around £60 per year. And there is a re-accreditation process every 5 years for those who are practicing CIAT accredited conservationists. So you have to go through a 5-year re-accreditation process to show you're still of the suitable standard. And again, we'll come to re-accreditation right at the end. So the assessment process, I'd like to think whoever's in the room's had a brief scan of the application form, the competencies, the guidance notes, and got a rough idea of the expectations. But similar to becoming a chartered architectural technologist, it's a technical portfolio assessment and a written narrative or statements to demonstrate your suitability. As we've alluded to, you do need to be practicing within a related or relevant conservation field. The 5 units and the bullet points and the aspects you need to cover, Paul is kindly going to give some insight and context on what they are on the next slide. We need to see a selection of evidence, so potentially 5 projects or elements of projects to prove the point. So it could just be one facet or one aspect in relation to your conservation outputs that might tick the box to meet the competencies. And something to be mindful is your projects or aspects of a project cannot be more than 5 years old. It's all about currency of application to meet the requirements. So it's £150 application fee for the assessment of your portfolio and against the competencies and potentially move to interview. And within your application, you need a summary of your experience. So that's a 500 to 750 word overview of your experience and context and information of your background, your scope of practice, what area you're within and how you got into that area. And really, like we would say for chartership, is that you should focus on your current roles and outputs or recent roles around leadership, management, experience and expertise in relation to conservation. Because ultimately, that summary of experience will give the context for the likes of Paul to understand your role, your responsibilities, your ability, your skill and experience, And that will inform them as they go through to make that judgment around your portfolio and your written narrative. All being well with that aspect, you're then invited to do your interview assessment. So we're just about to move on to the next 3 slides, which I'm going to pass over to Paul to speak to, because he's far better placed than me as one of our accredited conservationist assessors. So over to you, Paul, and just let me know when you want me to move on the slides.
Right. Am I unmuted now, James?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm an assessor on the Conservation Accreditation, and we, CIAT accredited conservationists need to be able to demonstrate a manner of skills, a good knowledge of conservation materials and technical ability, their technical skills. They can do this through their own personal work and their understanding of the standards that that apply to conservation work, how they manage time and their role within a design team or on site with the craftsmen and conservators, and their understanding of the philosophy. So to this end, the units have been developed in order to allow the candidates to demonstrate your understanding and experience within them. So the first one is conservation knowledge, and that's an ability to demonstrate your understanding of heritage assets, to be able to interpret them and understand their settings. Why are they significant? There are so many different types of significant. It could be the people that designed it, the people that built it, the materials it's built from, the people that lived in it or worked in it. There are a number of different types of significance, and many of them will need to be considered. And are some of the areas in your project more significant than others? As for conservation analysis, it's about the research and assessment of the information with the relevance to that asset and their settings and their relationship to other features within the immediate environs. It could be the buildings, it could be within a garden, it could be within a whole historic landscape. For example, Kew Gardens is famous garden in West London. It has 42 heritage assets within its custodianship. So it's being able to identify what its relationship is with all the other assets that are in the vicinity. And as I said, they have many different types of significance, and understanding these will be will help you contribute to informing how your proposed works are undertaken. Conservation techniques, it's about the understanding the behavior of the building and identifying the causes of decay. I was once told by a very, very wise conservation architect that what we do is we try to listen to what the building is telling us. And in order to do that, we may require additional assistance. It might be that we need somebody to monitor what the humidity fluctuations are within a building. It might be we need somebody to provide a structural assessment of its integrity or a part of its integrity, so on and so forth. Conservation methods is, how does your underpinning knowledge of the current charters and regulations and guidelines, how do they help you make your judgment towards your repair strategy or your repair proposals? And are you able to synthesize difficult concepts for an easier understanding? Many owners or custodians of historic buildings or heritage assets are lay people, so being able to communicate sometimes quite complex phenomena in an easily understandable way is a very important method of demonstrating your communication skills. And again, specialist assistance. It might be that there are wall paintings or special sort of sculptural elements, or decorative finishes within the building that need somebody who's has considerable experience in those areas to come and assist you in how you develop the repair strategy. Conservation expertise is, in some ways, maintenance is the key to conservation. And how you can demonstrate how you contributed to a client or custodian's better understanding of the building by the maintenance and monitoring of their assets. Do you need, have you contributed to a maintenance plan or a conservation management plan? How the works that are undertaken, have they been recorded so that they can be identified in the future? Is it possible for somebody in 10 years' time to know what intervention happened, and where it happened and what materials you used? And another is, how were you able to collaborate with other specialists or contractors or the statutory authorities in order to agree an appropriate methodology for the benefit of the building? One thing that it's important to remember is try to be concise. You will often find that one piece of evidence will cover more than one item in the list of the units. So don't be afraid to use one email to a structural engineer might cover 2 or 3 items. You might be able to reference it in 2 or 3 areas: a specification or a drawing or a presentation. Will may cover a multitude of competencies depending on the nature of the drawing. I'll have the next slide, if I may, please. So I'm not going to read the slide out. I'm just going to say the case study is the opportunity that for you to be able to pull many of these competencies together. I mean, life is rarely simple, and in conservation it's never simple. So just giving us a case study that says, oh, everything was a total success and I was great and everything worked well, those are the most boring case studies to assess. What we want to see is where you can demonstrate that the evidence has been considered and collated from a number of sources, and you've developed a strategy based on sound principles in collaboration with other people. I think that how you present your submission is very important. I've had occasions where I've spent 3 days going through a submission where there were literally dozens and dozens of folders of material, not particularly well referenced, where possibly through nervousness, making sure they covered the basics, they threw the kitchen sink at the application, and then said, pick the bones out of that. But that's, it's not the sort of way you would submit material to a client or a member of your design team. So think about it as being on a level with that. Your submission needs to be easily referenced, succinct, and ticking all the competencies that are laid out in a systematic manner. I'll take the next slide, please, James. Now, the interview. I think the interview is very similar to a chartered interview. There won't be nobody's trying to catch you out. There won't be any trick questions. What the assessors are looking for, they're looking for a good knowledge and understanding of the sector. They're looking for understanding of the philosophies that underpin the work, the conservation work. We're looking for a safe pair of hands, and nobody's expected to know everything, but if you know where to look, if you don't know something, is always an added bonus. So what we ideally, the best interview is where we don't ask any questions at all. You'll present a little, you'll give a presentation on your philosophy, whether you're a staunch spabber or whether you're a more scientific basis, or there's lots of, it's within conservation, there's quite a broad church. Some people choose not to use consolidants, others use them almost exclusively. So it will be, you'll talk us through your portfolio. We might ask a couple of questions where there were instances where we wanted a little bit of clarification on a particular competence item. So you might have covered it as and you've got 7 out of 10. We'll probably ask you a little supplementary question just so that we can top that up and be absolutely sure that you've given us everything we need in that particular situation. I think that's about it for me, James.
Yeah, Paul, that's pretty much covered it, to be honest with you. So quite insightful, good point of reference here to ask Paul while you've got him in the room. So the interviews are held remotely, and they're always going to be remote for specialist registers just because they sort of trickle through with applications. So once you're approved and your competencies and your portfolio is acceptable, you then apply for interview. So it's a £50 interview fee. It's designed to allow 45 minutes, similar for a chartership. And again, the discussion will cover the range and scope of the competencies to make sure that the applicants and the assessors are making a correct judgment around your appropriateness to get the recognition and qualification. So if you're ready to submit, we only accept submissions 3 times a year. There's any time in April, any time in August, any time in December. Okay, so if you're sitting here now, 6th of June, if you're particularly keen and you feel like you can get an application ready, from the 1st of August, you can submit your application in. So we will need that submitted electronically. We don't really accept Dropbox anymore. So primarily WeTransfer, Google Drives, OneDrives. I mean, WeTransfer is probably the best because you can also set expiration dates on the time of accessing your portfolio. And I think the standard is around 7 days. And we actually say it's 8 weeks for a decision, just because there's quite a small pool of people to go through your portfolio and assess against the competence. We'll also need an up-to-date CV, any relevant academic or professional qualifications, compliance of your CPD record, the summaries, the case studies, the evidence, and obviously the payment to do the review and the assessment. As I alluded to at the start as well, different to chartership or any other qualification within CIAT, there is a 5-year reaccreditation process where you will need to complete the respective pro forma at that stage, but let's cross that bridge when we come to it. And obviously provide evidence of currency and projects undertaken in that 5-year period prior to your initial accreditation to the reaccreditation. And obviously, if you're not necessarily undertaking that work specifically as much in that period as things might have changed, then obviously there are ways to tick that box around conservation CPD, and then you might be needed to have another interview if you're not providing the evidence to show your capabilities to meet the reaccreditation requirement for those who've got currency of delivering on projects and outputs within that 5-year period. Now, I know it's quite a short and concise presentation, which I'll stop sharing now. But the idea is really for everybody to have a chance to ask any questions. Now, if I get silence, there's some familiar faces in the room that I will ask to get it going. But has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask while we've got Paul specifically here for you to give you any clarification on what you're not sure about? So, and if you can ask a question, and then we'll come to the chat box question as well. If you don't want to ask verbally, chat box is fine as well. So, Anne, over to you.
Well, my question, I've just put it in the chat, was, as an academic at the moment, I'm obviously going to go down the non-practicing version. But if things change in my life and I go more into practice, can I make the transition from non to a full, from the semi-skim version to the full fat version?
I would say yes, upon meeting the competencies and the expectations of the differentials between the 2 levels. I see there's no preclusion from that. That's not a problem. If that's the path you go down, the competencies, the process is there, you just make that transition.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Okay. This one might be better for you, Paul, considering you look at them. So Darren's asking, how many pages would you generally expect to see within the portfolio? Now, if it was chartership, we say enough to prove the point, and I think that still rings true as a principle. So you would probably determine that, but I don't know whether Paul wants to come in.
Yes, I think being succinct and choosing your material carefully is part of the demonstrating the competence. I don't make the mistake of just handing over lots and lots of material and hoping that we'll sift through it and come out with a positive outcome. Choose it carefully. As I said, you may find that you can for want of a better word, you can recycle quite a lot of your documentation, in as much as they may, as I said before, one email may cover 2 or 3 of the different competencies. They might not cover them completely, and you will have to add supplementary material, but it's worth sort of looking and be very selective. And the other thing is that if you've contributed to a report, for example, don't necessarily want to see the whole report. I just want to see the part that you've written or that you've submitted in collaboration with other people. So extracts from reports are fine as well. Does that help?
Yep. I think that just reinforces the quality over quantity is really what we're looking for here. And we say that again for chartership applications as well. So moving over quite nicely, Gordon, you're quite involved in the delivery of the chartership applications, how to submit a portfolio. What is your question in relation to?
That's true. Yeah, it's all very similar words and stuff. My question is, we use other consultants as well. So I'm in private practice. I just had a look through my job book. We've done or worked on 5 listed buildings this year already. Which is quite unusually quite a lot, but we usually do, I don't know, 10 a year probably, and we do 50 projects a year. We work with structural engineer, party wall surveyors, and in particular we use one conservation officer who's ex-local authority who set up on his own, and I think that's where we're getting a lot of work from. So we don't prepare the heritage impact assessment, he does, but he always leans heavily on our drawings. We do most of the surveys, but if it's a very big project, we use outside surveyors as well, all of which are appointed by the client. So it's really, so I don't have a lot of input into the heritage impact assessment that Alex does, other than our drawings supporting his evidence, but he does lead me right through to mixes of mortar and where the stone's coming from, and the slates and all the different materials. He will go through all that with me and get me to put those on the drawings. So is it okay to, well, I assume it is, that I would put his documents in support of my evidence? Is that what am I right in thinking that?
Well, I think you're going to tick a few boxes here, because already in saying that you collaborate with a structural engineer and ex-conservation officer, you've already showed that you're in your management skills, that your expertise, that you can work with these people. I would yes, I mean, if you wanted to put in the heritage impact assessment and just highlight the bits that you've contributed, or where you've commissioned work by others, I think that would be acceptable. I'd prefer it if it wasn't the whole report, but if that's the way it comes, then maybe you just highlight the parts that you've written yourselves, or but the fact that you've collaborated with a load of other specialists and consultants, that's good. Sort of that shows that you've covered the competence in some of the areas.
That's fine. Yeah, I've been working with this chap for 25 years, but he was working for the local authority for most of that time, so he's become a poacher.
I was going to say, yeah, gamekeeper turned poacher.
Yeah, that's right. But he is very good, and he was always very. He was a planning officer and a conservationist, and he's done courses on it as well at Oxford Brook. So he's very, very knowledgeable, and is quite happy passing all the knowledge on to me that he knows.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much for your help.
Okay, good. I see Matt's got his hand up now.
Hi.
So over to you, Matt.
Hi, yeah, just a quick one. I take it you're looking when we're, when we've, hang on, how will I say? Yeah, when we've sent our case studies, are you looking to have a sort of a list alongside the case study going, these tick these this particular area will tick competency 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 1 and 5? Are you looking for that sort of quick reference?
So basically, in the candidate's guidance notes, there's a matrix document, and in the matrix document, you're supposed to put in the table which aspects prove which points. So we've tried to make it crystal clear in the application process so that Paul doesn't have to spend 3 days trying to wade through it. It's the fact of you matrix and reference it, and then he should be able to see from that table what specific documents, what you feel prove which point.
Right.
So we tried to make it foolproof, should we say? Like, and for it's easier for everybody, us, you, and the assessors on the other side.
Right.
You'll find that there's it's basically a very simple Word document table, and competence 1.1. This is your evidence. It's called so and so. It's filed here. 1.1, and so you might have 3 to demonstrate 1.1, and you might have 2 to demonstrate 1.2, and so on and so forth. Tell us what they are and where we find them.
Right. Yeah. So that's sort of outside of the case study. So
outside, that's outside of the case study. Yeah.
Fine. Got it. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
What is the time frame for CPD? My understanding is an annual obligation regarding CPD to show compliance with the expectation. So CPD is not necessarily a collection of certificates saying you went to CPD on X, Y, or Z. It's structured, it's non-structured, it's project specific, it's research based, it's reading articles, updates of regulation or legislation. We're quietly confident that every member or affiliate of CIAT probably does 35 hours CPD per month, let alone per annum. They just don't necessarily attribute that to being CPD. So if you sit back and think about it, you'd probably be pleasantly surprised of how much you learn today that you didn't know yesterday. And if you did that over a full year, it probably gets quite substantial in regards to CPD and meeting the expectation. So, we're quite confident that most members will tick that box. And it's not necessarily a collection of 35 certificates saying you've done an hour by a supplier on a specific topic, which is how some people might blur the lines of how they understand CPD. We're quite flexible. You decide what you need to know. You'll go and find out what you need to know. See what I mean?
Right. Can I book this as CPD, please, James?
If you've learned something today that you didn't know yesterday, you can. That's the art of it. Have you learned something, Paul?
Every day's a school day, James.
Oh no, unfortunately. Good. Is there any other questions from the floor? I mean, has anyone started it? Has anyone looked at it? Is anyone planning to apply in August? No pressure, Gordon or Anne or Craig.
I was wondering when I get picked on, James.
Well, yeah. Have you got any questions? I thought you might have.
No,
the odd one.
I don't think so. I think there's a number of us here at Purcell that are thinking about this and trying to best find the right projects that I guess fit the criteria. So yeah, we're thinking about it.
Good. I see Joe's got his hand up. So Joe, do you want to ask your question?
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was just a wee general question, really. And you might not know or not be able to say, but do you know the sort of split or percentage between people that do it sort of non-practicing and people that are in, currently practicing that go through the conservation accreditation?
Yeah, so all bar one are CIAT-accredited conservationists, i.e. practicing conservationists. So all bar one, there's one individual who's non-practicing, more so because I think he used to do it, but he's sort of like retired now, so he's just non-practicing. So I mean, most practicing technologists will probably be, CIAT-accredited conservationists if that's what you're going to go for, or the likes of Anne where she's in academia. For now, might be non-practicing, but might progress on depending on where paths take an individual. So yeah, most are full-on CIAT accredited conservationist practicing and in that specialist area. I mean, I noticed Des is also in the room, so Des is also an assessor. So I don't know if he's got anything to say, but you don't have to say anything, Des, because I already tapped up Paul to say a few bits.
I suppose that my only thought was it'd be really good, I think, in the future if we had enough folks that could assist with maybe a wee bit of mentoring or that type of thing as folks are preparing their applications, so that it's obviously separate from those who'd be assessing the applications. It might be good. And the other thought I have is that I'm connected with IHBC, which tends to be a lot of academics and a real broad church of skills. But with technologists, I think our natural magnetism is towards the technical, whereas it's not as easy to look at the philosophy and the history and all of those things, which I think we have a tendency to be slightly weaker on, and that's maybe where a wee bit more of the work is required, and looking at the charters and the philosophy, the conservation statements, all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, you know, once we've got a big enough pool, we probably could look to allocate mentors like we do for chartership. It's just, trouble is, if we allocate, well, Paul and Des are probably quite busy anyway. If we allocate Paul or Des, that lops off 2 of our assessors, which is somewhere in the region of 25% of the people we might call on. So, you know, I think to a point, you've got to give it the due diligence and the respect it deserves and give it your best crack. And the good sense check is someone in your organisation or other professionals that you work with on these type of projects to say, look, I've done this. Would you mind reading through it? Just to sense check to see, does it make sense to you? If it makes sense to you, then that's half the job done, because you understand what I did and we've worked together. Therefore, it should be more likely that CIAT and their assessors will be able to digest that and review that in a logical order. And again, you know, the word limits are there to keep you in check. If you can do it in less, that's not an issue. You just got to make sure you give that holistic overview, and it's all about the breadth and depth and the layers of experience. But it is achievable, it is attainable. It's like the time, energy and motivation. And for some of you, maybe a bit more experience in certain areas around the competencies. As Des alluded to, you're very much delivery, practical solution, but maybe you might have to look at it from the first principles and work on that potentially to build up your repertoire and your suitability and your competence. So
the other thing I would say is just have a go, you know, and if you need a couple of stabs at it, do it, because it's not a one shot is all you've got. Whenever I was starting it, I thought if it takes a couple of years, it takes a couple of years, but in the end it didn't. I just did a wee bit every week.
Yeah, I mean, Paul's got his hand up, but obviously when it comes in, it's similar to your chartership in that they might review it and say, well, most of it's fine. It's just 1.1 and 2.2 and 4.2 that need further clarification, context and or evidence. So, you know, if you give it a due respect, you do the best you can, then you can get it sent in. It is pre-vetted by Megan or myself to say that you're addressing the criteria. It's easy to navigate. The matrix document appears to be done. We don't assess it. We just look at structure and layout. Have you appeared to address the criteria? If so, we send that on to the panel for their review. Paul, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I if it's any help, I found when I started, I made a list of all the projects I've ever done, you know, I did some, what do they call it? A skills gap analysis. So I wrote down all the competencies and I tried to put a job to every competence, or 2 or 3 aspects of a job, or two or three jobs. And then you get a feel for where you're rich in evidence and where you're fairly lean in evidence. And that's where, and then once you know that, you can start either tapping up your boss for more work that will get you that experience, or you can maybe do CPD, or, you know, specifically, you know, courses or conferences where you can supplement that information. But I found going through it and writing a big grid of what I knew and what I needed to know was quite a helpful thing.
Yeah, I mean, we did a big review of this process, working with the likes of Des and Paul and all the other assessors, and it's far more straightforward as of this year than it was, say, 18 months ago. So maybe you've bided your time well, and now's the time to come through and apply. It's a lot easier to interpret and understand, and it's more straightforward to apply. So we've tried to make it as candidate orientated and as streamlined as we can. Just going back to Des and Paul, really, Dawn's asking, does it necessarily need to be a listed building, or can it just be historic local buildings of relevance and significance?
Well, I'm not sure of specific on this, although my opinion, not necessarily the opinion of the organisation, would be it's how it's approached, because it's obviously significant. It's all of those boxes that are ticked, whether it's listed or historically relevant in a conservation or whatever. The key thing is the process you go through and how it's approached, to me.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much bang on. It's all about how you word your narrative and give the context and the insight and the information for them to understand your thought process and your outputs and your deliverables. And then it'd be up to the likes of Paul and Des to come to their decision. So I would tend to concur with what Des has said. So I'm just mindful that we have got a bit more time, but if there's nothing else to be asked, then I'm happy to draw this to a close. I said, if you're not sure and you want to speak to someone potentially, I don't know whether Des or Paul would have a quick chat with you around it. I said, I don't really want them to be your mentor as such, because that limits our pool, but I'm sure they might be willing to have a quick 10, 15 minutes with you to maybe just set you off on that path and then leave it completely up to you. I don't see that being a conflict of interest if they just have a brief introductory discussion around process akin to this, but a bit more focused on you. You know, I'm a great believer. If you don't ask, you don't get. So you don't know whether you might be able to speak to Paul or Des if you don't drop me an email, and we'll take it from there. But good luck, and Gordon and Anne, I'll await your applications in August. Craig's is coming through in December, and everybody else hopefully by the start of next year.
Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Good. And any queries along the way, just send them to myself or Megan, and then we can just support you and clarify anything you're not quite sure about. Good luck with it. Obviously, if there's some of you that aren't chartered just yet and you keep meaning to do it, the Chartered Architectural Technology short course is running again over Teams, 21st of June, 28th of June, 19th of July. Drop me an email and Megan, and we can get you signed up to sit that course. Gordon will help deliver that training program. And hopefully I'll see some of you soon, and I'll stop recording now.
Lovely. Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Okay.